Very good evening to all of you. My name is Raj Kumar. I'm the founding Vice Chancellor of OP Jindal Global University. I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you. In fact, good morning to people who are watching this from other parts of the world, to this webinar on the theme Biden administration and international law, and the inauguration of a very important student-run society, the Jindal Society of International Law, under the aegis of the Center for the Study of United Nations at Jindal Global Law School of OP Jindal Global University. We are very, very delighted and indeed honored to have the distinguished presence of Professor Jose Enrique Alvarez, the Herbert and Rose Rubin Professor of International Law at the New York University School of Law, and who is also the former president of the American Society of International Law. I also want to extend a warm welcome to my colleagues, Professor Prof Popvski, as well as Professor Mohan Kumar, and of course, pay my, appreciation in particular to Ankit Malhotra, one of our students who has led the creation of the society itself. It's a very special occasion for a number of reasons. Of course, it's a special occasion when we have Professor Alvarez, although physically not present in India, to be part of this lecture event, but to actually be associated with one of our initiatives today. So I want to, first of all, express my deep appreciation and thank him for taking out time to deliver a very important lecture, which I would say in the years to come, historians will be possibly talking about the significance of this moment, and indeed the lecture itself, when he will do some futuristic thinking about the potential issue of implications of international law with regard to Biden administration itself. But it is also equally important because all of us are connected today by a very fundamental, let's say, belief in the ideal of the rule of law. We have engaged with law as a discipline, not only because of the fact that we are academically connected and engaged with law, but we also have a very strong belief and faith in the possibility of rule of law to be respected, and those who are holding power are made accountable to the principle of rule of law. This principle of rule of law, more often than not, is much more, let's say, enforced and implemented more visibly and more effectively in domestic context. And many a time, it does create challenges when it comes to its implementation in the international context. And that's, of course, one of the core aspects of today's discussion and indeed lecture when it comes to the rhetoric of international law and the reality of international law. To what extent international law and international institutions can be effective at a time when so much damage has actually been caused to international law and international institutions, not only in the context of the possibly the current presidency in the United States, but also I would argue that numerous other heads of states and heads of governments in different parts of the world, including in established older democracies, where the history and evolution of international law and international institutions played a very significant role. In many ways, it's an important moment when scholars of international law need to seriously discuss and debate as to what is the future of international law as a discipline, to what extent we can rely upon and depose our faith in the possibility of international law becoming effective, to what extent international institutions can have both the legitimacy and the credibility among the international community for it to be effective. What do we teach our students, particularly who are studying international law, and to reiterate the faith in the discipline, but also the power of international law and its ability to enforce the rule of law. So these are obviously very important issues of our time, and we couldn't have got a better person than Professor Alvarez, who has been one of the most profound and world-renowned thinkers in the field of international law, but also more particularly has served as a very distinguished public intellectual beyond being an extraordinary scholar. I'm also very, it's a special moment also for me to recognize that Professor Alvarez is teaching at the NYU Law School. As many students and faculty members at Jindal know, that the foundations of OP Jindal Global University and Jindal Global Law School were literally laid in the basement of the NYU Law Library, when I got to spend almost 8 months as a visiting scholar from September 2001 to April 2002. And during that time, I had the privilege to meet with a number of individuals who inspired me and who encouraged, supported, and even collaborated in that vision. And those people include Professor Norman Dawson, who's unfortunately no more. We paid tribute to him some time ago, Frank Upham, and of course, my very dearest friend and also chair of our International Board of Advisors, Professor Peter Schuck, and also my mentor, Professor Philip Alston. So in many ways, having Professor Alvarez and here today is a very special moment, recalling the journey and the relationship that we have had with the NYU Law School over the years. And of course, the president of the NYU New York University itself has been a longtime friend and supporter of OP Jindal Global University, Professor Alexander Hamilton, who used to be Vice Chancellor of the University of Oxford. So with those words, I want to once again formally extend my warm welcome, my deep appreciation, and also my gratitude to Professor Alvarez for agreeing to deliver the lecture, but also encouraging the inauguration of a new student-run society led by Ankit Malhotra and other colleagues. The fact that students still have faith in the discipline of international law to set up a student-run society today gives us hope and gives us reason to continue the work that we are doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vice Chancellor Rajkumar. Let me also, on behalf of the Center for the Study of United Nations in Jindal Global Law School, welcome warmly an old friend, Jose Alvarez, for his acceptance to inaugurate the birthday of the Jindal Society for International Law with such an excellent topic. To be honest, I was a bit nervous when we planned this before the result of the US elections. And actually, I was keeping nervous for a few days after the elections too, until the final counts went, and we were happier to see that our event is actually going to happen exactly with the topic we planned before the elections. And fortunately, the US citizens did not disappoint us, and they voted massively and everywhere in all the states. And we have today an excellent occasion, the Jindal Society of International. We have an excellent topic, Biden administration and international law, and we have an excellent speaker. Nobody better can address this than Jose Alvarez. The questions we will probably talk later today are whether we will have a return to normalcy and multilateralism simply, or whether the next administration will start a fresh movement. And this is not only in terms of replacing Trump administration with Biden administration, but obviously 2020 was marred with the COVID-19 turmoil, and a lot of concepts and a lot of scientific thinking has been revised and reimagined those days. So whether we will go back to normal or whether we will build back better will be an interesting question to think about. There have been challenges even before COVID-19, and the moment of COVID-19 comes as a reminder that we can lose, but we can also win. There is also a moment of opportunity in addition to the moment of tragedy in all global crises, as we know. And somehow COVID-19 brings us to generally 5 challenges or 5 tests. And one is the test of leadership, and this is probably most interesting here to think about how different leaders respond to crises such as COVID-19, and in particular in this case, how the current and the future US administration will deal with the crisis itself, major crisis indeed. The crisis of international cooperation, and we have seen that United Nations, but also other international institutions are crucial to gather global knowledge and to create the sense of legitimacy and trust citizens expect, and how that can be reimagined, whether we will have major transformation of the international system of international institutions is also another test to see in starting from 2021. I will call it the third one, the test of medical capacity and medical science, how quickly that can also be advanced in order to provide the necessary relief for many people around the world. The fourth test is the test of human-human relationship, and it's also quite interesting to observe whether the next year and the next era in international law will make life better. We have seen a lot of sliding back into populism, nationalism, xenophobic feelings, not only in the United States, but also in many parts of the world. The missing moral voice from international community was there because also, as we know, a lot of dictators had a free hand over the last years because there was no strong moral voice coming from the White House. And finally, and I think crucially, the fifth test will be the test of human relationship with nature, to put it broadly, or in other words, what will happen with issues such as climate change, for example, what will happen with sustainable development goals, how much more efforts are needed to recover the time lost because of COVID-19 in terms of fighting poverty, hunger, education, health, gender equality, and all other sustainable development goals. So all of those tests makes today lecture by Jose Alvarez quite interesting. It's really I will call it Rubicon River time. We need to cross the Rubicon and see 2021 as possibly, as Vice Chancellor Rajkumar mentioned, possibly this will be the moment to remember. Maybe 10 or 20 years later, people will go back to 2021 as a decisive time to build back better. Therefore, I would like very much to hear from Jose now. Jose, you are the next to speak about how do you see international law in the next 4 years of Biden administration. Obviously, we know about the recommitment to the Paris Agreement of climate change, which was very much strongly supported at the time of Obama-Biden administration 4 years back. We may expect, obviously, also recommitment to the Iran nuclear deal, demanding compliance, obviously, from the Iranian leadership, but gradually also easing the sanctions. We may expect the United States to rejoin the WHO, a very high priority task to continue the successful fight against COVID-19. And more generally, as I mentioned, the recommitment to human rights. We need to see a powerful voice from Washington against violations of human rights globally. In other words, dictators should not have an easy time from now on. And there are still many dictators, as we know, around the world. Bashar al-Assad, Lukashenko, Erdogan, Orban, and others. So up to you, Jose, now. Your time is starting. Thank you once again for joining our inauguration of the Jindal Society, and be always welcome to Jindal Global University, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chancellor Kumar, professors and deans. I'm greatly honored to be included in this inaugural event, and also thanks to Ankit Malhotra for doing so much work to organize it. And at the outset, let me say that issuing predictions like Cassandra is tricky business. We all know her dire fate, And so take my own predictions with a grain of salt. Now, as far as international law is concerned, Trump was a consequential US president. Many international lawyers are rightly celebrating what we assume is his defeat. And for sure, the US election promises to bring lawyers, international lawyers, back to, as the musical Hamilton has it, the room where it happens. But expectations for a full-scale restoration of international law need to be tempered. In his single term in office, Trump cemented some old tendencies and started new ones that I think will last in US foreign policy. And let me just quickly go over those. One, a preference for non-treaty commitments that don't require approval by both houses or either house of the US Congress. Second, a more wary, hostile approach towards China. Third, skepticism of the world trading system. Fourth, reliance on trade sanctions to punish bad actors. Fifth, a caution, disinterest, and sometimes downright skepticism to the organizations of the UN. Sixth, opposition to most forms of international courts and tribunals. Seventh, opposition to never-ending wars, including starting ones for humanitarian purposes. And eighth, an ever more ironclad commitment to Israeli security. Now, a Biden administration could be expected to modify each of these, adopt a more measured diplomatic tone, but make no mistake, I would predict that 4 years from now, all 8 trends will still be recognizable aspects of US foreign policy. And some of this will be due to the world that Biden has inherited, but some is the result of who Biden is. A President Biden will not set out to systematically dismantle everything associated with his predecessor. Unlike Trump, AKA Termination Man, who sought to undo all things Obama, Biden is too careful, too thoughtful, too bipartisan, too rational, too respectful of rule of law to imitate Trump that way. This is particularly likely to be the case if Biden installs a bipartisan cabinet in his overriding effort to unite the red and the blue of a nearly equally divided nation. And some of the reasons of the constraints he'll face is due to structural limits that are internal to the United States at the moment. A more or less equally divided Congress, a more resistant and conservative federal judiciary, path-dependent federal civil servants, and legal limits on reversing federal regulations as opposed to executive orders, and doing so very quickly. In my limited time, let me suggest how these things will cast a shadow over the international law restoration. So constraints on treaties. The first 100 days of the Biden administration will not be filled with US ascensions to multilateral treaties that much of the civilized world joined a long time ago. Even if Democrats manage to regain the slight control that they may have over the Senate, do not expect the US to ratify the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the Covenant on Economic, Social, or Cultural Rights, the American Convention of Human Rights, the Rights of the Child Convention, the Law of the Sea Convention, or Statute of the International Criminal Court. Don't expect Biden to remove the US reservations to the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, or even the Torture Convention. The country that took over 40 years to ratify the Genocide Convention does not change its spots so quickly. And much of the world, and not only the US, has been exceedingly cautious these days about ambitious treaty making. It is true, as Vaseline just indicated, Biden will fulfill his promise to have the US rejoin the Paris Agreement on climate change, because that's easy. He can do it without congressional approval. And over time, you can expect him to do many other things to protect the planet in the same way that Pope Francis declared in his encyclical Laudato Si. Since the US and China jointly account for 40% of global greenhouse gas emissions, Biden will try, I predict, to reignite the US-China bilateral climate relationship that was begun under Obama. He's likely to join China in pledging to lower the level of its carbon emissions by a date certain, as China has done, as Japan has done. And he can do much towards that end just by changing the policies of the US Environmental Protection Agency, and to do so through the climate mitigation efforts of US states. And so he doesn't necessarily have to have Congress to make progress on that. He may also attempt to join a joint US-China cooperation agreement that would tap into the two countries' respective strengths, US talents in inventing and China's capacity to commercialize and cheaply produce clean energy technologies such as solar panels. And you could expect him to do things like joining the 2018 Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration, because it is a soft law commitment, not requiring Congress, and that also can help address the dilemma of climate change migration. There may be also exceptional cases where President Biden will attempt to secure a bilateral treaty. He is likely to try to return to the effort to revive the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Agreement with Russia that Trump terminated due to Russia's violations. Unlike Trump, Biden is rightly worried about escalating the nuclear threat to the world. Now, there are many reasons why the US's return to international law will occur, in my view, largely through sole executive agreements, a few bilateral agreements, soft law agreements, or agency actions at the national level, instead of high-profile multilateral treaty ratifications. This has been clear since the Obama years that the US Constitution and Capitol Hill traditions make the conclusion of treaties purposely difficult. Obama tended to go for international agreements that were already authorized under existing US law or under a previously concluded treaty. And Biden is not likely to change that. Biden is likely to find, in fact, very few members of Congress whose top priority is ratifying a particular treaty. The UN Convention on the Law of the Sea is a case in point. There is the reasons why the US should be a party to that are ever stronger than ever before, given the continuing threats to international peace posed by China's actions in and around the South China Sea. But no one on Capitol Hill predicts that the Biden administration will spend the political capital needed to secure cession to UNCLOS. And another reason for continued timidity on treaty initiatives is the continuing relevance of that populist mindset that Vaseline just mentioned. That mindset propelled Trump to the White House, and let's be clear, very nearly kept him there. A Biden presidency is likely to prioritize, because of that mindset, what Madeleine Albright has called intermestic issues, international initiatives that have a clear domestic policy significance and therefore are likely to draw support from even those sovereigntists that are in the US Congress. Biden will never utter the phrase America first, but that sentiment will compel him to justify every foreign policy action he takes in terms of how it will benefit the people of the United States. In his possible single term, Biden will spend precious political capital on filling out international lawyers' wish list only insofar as these further the interests of his target audience, blue-collar workers on so-called Main Street. Re-entry into the Paris Agreement will be sold to the US public on the basis that it is needed to make sure that Main Street is not flooded, burnt to the ground, or torn apart by hurricanes thanks to climate change. The US return to the WHO and its global scripts for testing, contact tracing, isolation will be justified not by abstract commitments to multilateralism, but on the simple basis that we need to do it to keep more Americans alive and, yes, Main Street open for business. Now, this turn to intermestic rationales can be a recipe for enhancing US compliance with international law. Even without passing new laws, we can expect proactive efforts by the executive branch to protect the rights of African Americans by a less moribund civil rights division of the US Justice Department, proactive enforcement of civil rights encouraged by the Black Lives Movement, as well as changes to how law enforcement officers are disciplined and prosecuted for their actions at the state and local level, greater prosecutions of threats and acts by white supremacists, rules that eliminate private prisons and that reduce criminal penalties for minor drug offenses. All this will enable the US to have somewhat better answers the next time it is asked rude questions by the Third Committee or the Human Rights Committees of the UN. Should the US return to the Human Rights Council, as I think is likely, it may even support an attempt to appoint a commission of inquiry to investigate systemic racism in law enforcement that includes looking at it in the United States. Attention to the unequal racial impact of both the current pandemic and of climate change will enable Biden to draw connections, broader connections, to devote a whole of government approach to things like all his priorities, including human rights. You can also expect predicted efforts to defend the rights of organized labor, an important democratic constituency, and this will elevate somewhat the status and credibility of the US with respect to international labor rights. Genuine efforts by the Justice Department to correct pervasive gender discrimination, the expected lifting of the gag rule that bars US aid agencies that support reproductive rights abroad. All this will enhance the credibility of the US before human rights bodies, even if the US does not join CEDAW. And Biden, who as vice president got ahead of his own president by endorsing same-sex marriage, is also likely to embrace LGBTQ+ priorities that are identified in the Democratic Party platform. He will eliminate the transgender ban on military service, and he will appoint senior leaders at the State Department, USAID, for which this is a priority. And eliminating the policy of separating immigrant children from their parents, reversing other Trump executive orders that relate to immigration, including taking action on the so-called Dreamers in the US, eliminating the revamped Muslim ban, reversing constraints imposed on the exercise of the rights of asylum and non-refoulement. All of this will make the US actions more compliant with a number of human rights instruments, including the Torture and Refugee Conventions. These are the under-the-hood changes in Trump executive orders and in how US agencies implement the law that I predict will be the principal way that the US will try to restore some of its lost soft power on human rights. Second, a more hostile, some would say a somber view of China. Views of China within the United States, and I dare say in places like India, given clashes that I see in the Himalayan border region, have hardened to the point where the only question among some people is just which path China intends to take to achieve, quote, global domination. Biden will be far more nuanced and less binary than that. He's described China as the US's principal adversary and sole strategic competitor for leading power status. That is a careful approach. Biden does not seek US-China decoupling, nor a descent into a new US-China Cold War. He will follow the Chinese proverb and walk on two legs. He will treat China as a hostile power or strategic competitor or ally as needed, given distinct US goals. A Biden administration will make it clear that it will consider certain Chinese actions, such as interference with transit rights on the high seas, arbitrary arrests of foreigners, or threats to invade Taiwan. These it will consider to be unacceptable, hostile actions against the status quo. But at the same time, it will signal that it wants to cooperate in matters of often global concerns, and not just climate change, to permit joint efforts against terrorism, the spread of weapons of mass destruction, or preempt missile launches by North Korea. He will treat China as a competitor in the race of winning hearts and minds in the developing world, with perhaps a US-backed infrastructure development projects to respond to China's formidable Belt and Road Initiative. Third, skepticism of the world trading system. The US disenchantment with the WTO as a forum for negotiating new trade rules to respond to new realities, as a place to effectively monitor what states are doing, as an effective forum for resolving trade disputes. All these complaints predate the Trump administration and will outlast it. There is a bipartisan consensus within the United States that while the world has changed, the WTO has not. But Biden, like the US business community, will not engage in Trump's loose talk of simply leaving the WTO. He will try to re-engage with WTO reform efforts. He has no interest in sliding down Trump's protectionist path that is premised on tit-for-tat tariffs, and he has particularly no interest in imposing legally implausible tariffs on the US's traditional allies like Canada and Europe. Steering a centrist path on the WTO is very hard, given the Sanders-Warren wing of his party, but is also hard because of concerns across the aisle among Republicans that the WTO's rules are simply ill-suited to liberalize trade in the age of digital trade, e-commerce, subsidized and forced tech transfers by non-market economies and their SOEs, unfair special concessions given to relatively well-off and self-identified developing countries like China, and repeated failures by the WTO to police its members when they take trade actions that are really protectionist. Now, which part of this substantial WTO reform agenda that Biden inherited he will act on remains a guessing game. Much turns on who will replace the current head of the U.S. Trade Representative's office, currently led by Robert Lighthizer. There are some who think he may actually keep Robert Lighthizer in place. Now, despite skepticism of trade agreements that have accelerated in the age of Trump, I would predict that a Biden president would probably seek to renew the fast track authority, which expires in mid-2021 and would permit the president to conclude bilateral or regional trade agreements simply by having a majority in both houses of Congress, and to do so within a short window. But even if Biden were to win, and that'll be a hard battle to win, to get that authority, he is not likely, in my view, to use it in the short to medium term to actually conclude new trade agreements. And this, despite the fact that he faces right now considerable pressure from the US business community that is now quite threatened by its exclusion from the emerging global supply chains that are going to occur under the Regional and Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP. If Biden were to respond to that pressure, his most likely route would be to restore some kind of trade equilibrium vis-a-vis China by returning to the Trans-Pacific Partnership that Trump foolishly abandoned in those first days in office. But that would likely require considerable compromises with its progressive wing and an attempt to renegotiate parts of that TPP in light of some of the things that are in the US-Mexico-Canada agreement, the USMCA, that Biden will leave undisturbed. This could include, for example, limiting in the TPP the US acceptance of investor-state dispute settlement in ways that will remind you in India of what India's latest bit does with respect to investor-state, including assertions of exhaustion of remedies before you can go to arbitration. And if Biden were to go with new trade agreements, you can expect new provisions to require climate change mitigation. Fourth, continued use of sanctions on bad actors. We will see the continuation of sanctions on China and Russia, but for different reasons. He will keep Russian sanctions in place and possibly escalate them. The relations between Biden and Putin are not going to be pretty because he will cite Russia's interference in elections, its seizure of Crimea, and the bounties put on US soldiers in Afghanistan. He will continue sanctions on China, but they may be premised on the Hong Kong security law, on China's treatment of the Uyghurs, and less on the contention that China manipulates its currency or was responsible for spreading the so-called China virus. Now, just acting and suggesting that what China is doing in Uyghur concentration camps is genocide, if he goes that far, and the Canadian Parliamentary Committee has gone that far, that alone would be a 180-degree shift from President Trump's reported statement to Xi Jinping that building these internment camps was, quote, the right thing to do, close quote. Fifth, circumspection with respect to the UN system. Now, Biden knows that few people in Congress or even the general public are invested in the UN. US disillusionment, disinterest in the UN, even though I teach it, I love it, precedes Trump and will outlast him. The only organization with a serious constituency on Capitol Hill is NATO. The only organization that the general public of the US, of the UN system, the general public hears is UNICEF. Still, unlike Trump, Biden realizes that disengagement with the UN weakens rather than strengthens US sovereignty. Biden knows, as apparently Trump did not, that the absence of the US from UN system organizations leaves a void that other states, particularly China, are willing to fill, and that is probably in our own and perhaps the world's detriment. Biden will accordingly re-engage more with the UN, appoint a serious UN ambassador, re-engage with multilateral forums like the UN Human Rights Council and the WHO. But Trump's withdrawals and wariness of these organizations, however misguided, will provide Biden with some leverage to address long-standing grievances with them. The Biden administration will attempt to resume global leadership over what remains of the global liberal international order by insisting on institutional reforms that make these entities, quote, work as intended, build back better for the UN. His administration will likely continue, for example, Trump's UN Integrity Initiative. This initiative was designed to call attention to the particular risks of China's rise in these organizations, namely its adverse impact on the independence of international civil servants and China's corrosive effect on the apolitical contribution of UN technocratic organizations. Under a Biden administration, this UN initiative for integrity might be perceived as something more than just a cynical attempt to undermine China's emerging global aspirations. A US effort to protect whistleblowers within the UN system, to defend the integrity of UN elections, to empower public servants that have apolitical expertise in UN agencies. All of this is likely to have far more credibility if it is actually led by a government that actually protects its own whistleblowers, does not undermine the integrity of its own elections, and actually appears to value and trust experts. Now, if re-elected to the UN Human Rights Council, the US will express displeasure over the Council's recent decisions to admit, for example, China, Saudi Arabia, and Cuba to its ranks, remind the Council that its membership was supposed to take the human rights records of its members into account, and resist China-led efforts to turn that body's Universal Periodic Review into empty celebratory occasions to commend human rights violators for their so-called progress. Biden will try to fix the WHO, not leave it. As a re-engaged member of the WHO, the US will pay the dues that Trump withheld, but also attempt to use its financial leverage to back institutional reforms and secure a genuine, candid assessment of what the organization did wrong from the time the first COVID case emerged in China through to the present day. A president elected largely because his predecessor failed to contain a pandemic can be counted on to see threats to global health as the national security threats that they are, and to act accordingly. Our new healthcare president is likely to take seriously the WHO's constitution and its premise that there is indeed a fundamental right to health. Unlike Trump, President Biden will agree that the failure of one state to prevent the spread of a contagious disease presents a common danger to all of us, and that all states benefit when each protects the health of its own citizens. Like China's President Xi, he will temper vaccine nationalism by contributing to and joining COVAX, the alliance that ensures that any vaccine developed by contributing rich nations will also be available to 92 low-income countries. 6, aversion to international courts. Biden will only tinker at the margins with respect to U.S. traditional reluctance to submit to supranational forms of adjudication. He is not likely to resolve the stalemate over the WTO's appellate body simply by agreeing to appointing new appellate body members. He will probably attempt to back proposals for reforms that were rejected by Trump and that have been backed by a group of states led by, for example, Ambassador David Walker of New Zealand. These reforms include a renewed commitment by the WTO appellate body to engage in more judicial minimism and less activism, and they're likely to be treated by the US as a quid pro quo for bringing the WTO dispute settlement back to life. And the most difficult issue, getting China to agree that it should no longer be treated as a developing state, might be subject to a trade-off based on dispute settlement. China might be persuaded to acquiesce to changing its developing country status and the benefits it gets from that if the US were to accept recent panel rulings like US tariff measures on certain goods from China. That ruling found that US tariffs taken in response to IP complaints directed at China were illegal. It is possible that a more sober USTR under a Biden administration might accept a ruling that forces the US tariffs to be more carefully justified under the WTO's Article 20 and 21 exceptions. This would reflect the old-fashioned idea that the US gets reciprocal benefits from avoiding transparently bad faith arguments to justify its trade actions. And it will help to convince people that the US still supports a rule-based system for trade after Trump's disastrous trade wars. But no one should expect that a Biden administration will become a sudden convert to the virtues of other international courts. A Biden administration is no more likely than President Trump to sign on to the compulsory jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice. He will not submit to the jurisdiction of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, or even perhaps to accepting the optional protocol under the ICCPR for individual complaints. He will not endorse proposals for new global courts that are now very popular in Europe, and I've written about this, a proposed World Court of Human Rights, an International Environmental Court, an International Anti-Corruption, Anti-Terrorism, or Anti-Trafficking Court, a Multilateral Investment Court, an Arbitration Tribunal for Business and Human Rights. I suspect he will throw serious support at none of those. At the same time, you can expect President Biden to adopt a kinder, gentler policy towards the International Criminal Court, even while it will continue to resist adherence to the Rome Statute and the Kampala Protocol on Aggression. The John Bolton-inspired executive order issued by Trump that penalizes anyone who dares work for the International Criminal Court will be among the first of many Trump-era executive orders to disappear. Seventh, rest in peace to R2P, responsibility to protect. Biden was never a fan of Obama's decision to lead from behind with respect to NATO action in Libya. And like Trump, he will be adverse to starting and staying in never-ending wars, even for humanitarian reasons. He will find no resistance on that score from fellow Security Council members, Russia and China. And at the same time, his administration, though, will be more engaged in trying to make the UN Security Council relevant, if not great, again. Unlike Trump, he would support, for example, future Security Council action to respond pandemics as the threats to the international peace that the Council once found they were in the case of Ebola. Seventh, ironclad security commitments to Israel. Biden's expected recommitment to protecting Palestinian rights in any Middle East peace deal now has to be undertaken in a U.S. embassy that is relocated, I suspect, permanently to Jerusalem. Trump's executive order recognizing the Golan Heights as part of Israel, the closure of the Palestine's diplomatic mission in Washington. I suspect those facts on the ground will probably not change, despite considerably icier relations between the U.S. and Netanyahu, nor will the U.S. encouragement of additional bilateral peace agreements. These will continue after Trump. Those are the agreements now with Sudan, Bahrain, and the UAE. And I do think that those agreements, however good for Israel's security, may complicate any possibility of a broader peace deal. So where does all this leave us? A kind of U.S. international law restoration is indeed coming, but it will occur in a world transformed by Trump's years in office, anti-democratic trends around the world, disenchantment with the international legal order, including the UN. The U.S. and the world has changed in 4 years. This is not only because of an ongoing pandemic that has produced excess deaths, economic calamity, human rights violations for some of the world's poorest and most vulnerable. It is also because we have witnessed a paralyzed UN system that has repeatedly failed to protect human life, whether in conflict zones like Syria, on migrant-filled rafts in the Mediterranean, amidst forest fires in Australia or California, or in intensive care units around the world. Biden is heir to deep-seated skepticism about the efficacy of international organizations and the possibilities of the once hegemon to fix them. That's one reason why his term is not likely to bring us a third term of Obama with respect to foreign affairs. 4 years of Trump have made even restoring Obama-era policies difficult, and yet for another reason. Trump has eviscerated trust that the U.S. will keep its word, or that having given it, it will actually do what it promises. This alone will complicate any renewed effort to seek the help of others. on climate change, on closing Guantanamo, on rendering suspects accused of terrorism. It will take decades, I suspect, to restore a reputation lost in a scant 4 years. Even the US's traditional allies are aware that nearly half of US voters supported a second term for an extremely unilateralist president, and that over half may yet elect another one that is just slightly more competent. That reality means that NATO members will welcome Biden's expected embrace, but continue to assume that in the future, they will need to have a plan B for securing Europe. Another factor that complicates a return to Obama-era policies is that over 4 years, there's been a massive change in US foreign and intelligence services. Trump sidelined career diplomats, fired independent inspectors, and did a variety of things to undermine that service. I was just looking to see if I still had a bit of time. So far, I haven't been sent the dreaded 5-second warning or 5-minute warning.
5 minutes, 5 minutes.
5 minutes, great. Now, of course, Biden will try to correct the Foreign Service. He will undoubtedly seek to reassert the value of apolitical intelligence, foreign policy expertise, compliance with ethical standards. He will be expected, I think, to take seriously the need to, quote, race, R-A-C-E, US foreign policy, so that its diplomats look like the US itself. At present, only 4 of the US's 189 ambassadors are Black, and he will seek to change that. This will have expected benefits, I think, by making the US a more credible advocate of structural racism around the world. It may also help to redirect attention to ignored regions, including Africa, where there are now 4 serious conflicts between Western Sahara and Morocco, a protracted war in Libya, a long-simmering insurgency in Mali, and a civil war threat in Ethiopia. But making diplomacy professional again, even if he were to try to distribute MDPA hats instead of MAGA hats with that slogan, is not a sexy topic. It will be a tremendous lift for an administration that is facing unprecedented other challenges that have far greater political salience. And in the meantime, Biden will have to work with a decimated State Department that he has inherited, including leftover deputies that have now acquired the status of civil servants and will not necessarily leave when Trump does, which we hope he does quickly. If past is prologue, these officials will not immediately get with the new program. That means that Trump's deep state, ironically, may live on a bit, this time to delay, obstruct, sometimes even derail the new president's priorities. Cutting across all these 8 very depressing, somber trends is a single theme that could give us great hope. And it cuts across against Trump's erratic belligerence. And that is Biden's reliance on allies, his reluctance to go it alone. And he draws this, as he said in his climactic speech at Warm Springs, Georgia, on the brink of the election. And he drew from the Pope Francis' latest encyclical, Fratelli Tutti, fraternal openness, defined as acknowledging others. Biden is expected to return to rely on allies, not just because perhaps of his faith, but because of geopolitical realities. The US is no longer the sole superpower on the bloc. It simply needs the help of others. He has argued, rightly, that US power over competitors like China is the power of its alliances. This is Biden's go-to response when asked about everything: continued threats from North Korea, Russia's actions in the Ukraine, common threats to democracy posed by cyber attacks, or China's malign behavior in the South China Sea towards Hong Kong or Taiwan, or with respect to trade or intellectual property. His response to the unfolding Pacific century, the rise of China, is to strengthen ties with key allies in the region, including Japan, South Korea, and Australia, to have robust engagement with institutions like ASEAN. His response to China's new military aggressiveness will be to continue to care and feed the quadrilateral security dialogue, the Quad, between the US, Japan, Australia, and India. That effort, as many of you know, includes joint military exercises of an impressive scale, even one that is occurring this week in the North Adrian Sea between India, US, Japan, and Australia. That is symptomatic of another recent trend, namely recourse to less institutionalized substitutes when the UN system doesn't do it. Biden will return to a reinvigorated transatlantic partnership to secure common solutions to governing big data flows while respecting privacy, or to achieve greater energy security while combating climate change. He will seek Iraqi help to ensure lasting defeat of ISIS, European partners to invigorate diplomacy to protect the humanitarian needs of Syrians, and forms of cooperation in the Western Hemisphere to address his announced priorities in the Americas, addressing the root causes of immigration in Central America, protecting the Amazon from deforestation, assisting nations in the Western Hemisphere, including the Caribbean, to adapt to climate change. All of this would be dramatically at odds with the unilateralist inclinations of his predecessor. The search for allies is inherent in Biden's tendency to find common ground with his political opponents, whether in Congress or around the world. His instinct is to elicit consensus by emphasizing fact over fiction, science over QAnon, and deference to experienced diplomats over businessmen, and they have sadly been mostly men, that have bank accounts. So what can we hope for? The spontaneous celebrations that erupted in New York and all around us drew comparisons with cherished victories over authoritarians everywhere. The 2020 election demonstrates once more that US politics continues to be defined by sharp divides between so-called values voters, who often identify as evangelical Christians, and secular, largely urban elites on the East and West coasts of the United States. Ironically, the presidential candidate most strongly backed by those secular coastal elites turns out to be a practicing Catholic, apt to take seriously Pope Francis' call to defend common humanity in Fratelli Tutti and to protect the planet in his other encyclical, Laudate Si. Our incoming president also seems inclined to take seriously those of us who still have faith that international law and its institutions can help achieve both of those goals and many more. That alone is an occasion to celebrate, and thank you for having
me. Thank you very much, Professor Jose Alvarez. I want to begin by saying, wow, I don't know what else to say, because Ankit, thank you very much for this initiative, but kindly do me a favor. Please, I hope you have this on YouTube, but I don't know how many people will watch it. Transcript it and make sure it is compulsory reading for the law school faculty and the students. But more importantly, I'm bothered about my school, School of International Affairs. Every single student, I mean, I say this not to flatter you, Professor Alvarez. I've been reading and reading on Biden administration. I've appeared on TV shows and tried to say whatever, I could figure out. But what you've done is, the French have a word which you cannot translate into English, a brilliant tour d'horizon, as they say. That is the only way I can describe it. So please allow me to congratulate you. Honorable founding Vice Chancellor, Professor Alvarez.
No, I didn't even discuss with you. I have said in my comment, amazing, what a comprehensive lecture. Indeed, a tour de force. Truly a masterpiece. Congratulations, Professor Alvaro, and thank you for doing this for us and indeed for the world at large.
So I didn't see that either. So I'm really proud and happy that my Vice Chancellor also shares my view, or rather I share his view. So really, there is no two questions about it. And I hope you are having a wide audience listening to us. Thank you so much. I would be very, very interested in the transcript. I wanted to also say hello to my colleague, Professor Prof Popvski, and Ankit, well done, but please take my advice seriously. I'm looking forward to that script. No, I will begin, and they've given me 15 minutes, Professor, so I'll do my 2 pence bit, which will be a bit of an anti-climax after your speech. But nevertheless, first, I agree with you. History seldom moves in straight lines. So I don't think anybody should expect a return to the pre-Trump-Obama kind of scenario. I think the world has changed, notwithstanding Trump, so there will be no going back. That much I think I figured. The more important question I have for you, if you don't mind, I'll ask you a couple of questions taking advantage of your enormous expertise. One is that I was going through this legal constitutional framework, and it's customary to say that in India, the government can enter into international treaties without consulting the parliament. We don't need parliament's assent in India. And the parliament comes into the picture only if domestic law has to be changed. You very rightly said that if there are treaties, then Biden will be constrained by congressional approval, or specifically Senate approval. But I noticed something very interesting as I was reading up for this event. If you take Paris Climate Change Accord, the UNFCCC agreement in '92 was classified as a treaty, and the Senate approved it. But Mr. Obama, in his infinite wisdom, said the Paris Agreement is an executive agreement and it didn't go to Senate. So my first question, your constitution does not define what is an executive agreement and a treaty. So what prevents a president to say that something is an executive agreement, and who can object? Because obviously both the Paris Accord and the Iranian nuclear deal have been defined as executive agreements. And Professor, you will agree with me, there are aspects of both agreements which can actually be defined as treaties, frankly, especially the nuclear deal, because it involves UN Security Council resolutions, which are binding. So I don't know how the presidents got away with this. And my first point, therefore, is I see legislative check in America declining. Am I right in saying this? Power is shifting from the legislature to the executive. And while you seem to have faith in the innate decency of Mr. Biden, what prevents Mr. Biden to say, let me do another Trump and let me also do what I want? So that is my first question to you. The second question I have for you is the diminution of checks and balances. One of the things that has struck me during the last 4 years is not the behavior of Mr. Trump, because everybody expected this from him. It is that executive officers, diplomats, others have not been able to stand up to him, frankly. And is this a continuing phenomenon, or do you see this as a one-off? Because these checks and balances are very famous in the American system. While we say it is the leader of the free world and the most powerful job in the world, we also say the American system has checks and balances. Do you see the checks and balances breaking down? That's my second question. The last question, of course, is you've answered it for me. I think they're going to rule by executive orders, administrative orders, and federal regulations. And there is so much which can be done. I understand from my statistics, Mr. Obama did 376 of those. Mr. Trump did 176. Nothing prevents Mr. Biden from doing 200 orders in his 4-year presidency. And a lot can be done. So my first point really is he's going to rejoin Paris Accord. He's going to extend the New START treaty. He's going to relook the Iranian nuclear deal, and he's going to rejoin WHO. These are 4 seminal decisions he's capable of doing without bothering about Senate. This to me speaks a lot about what an American president can do. So if this is correct, this itself represents a paradigmatic shift in terms of multilateralism. This is good enough for me. I mean, I'll come to WTO, my pet subject, a little later. That is more complicated. But if he can do these 4 without worrying about Mr. McConnell, his name is Mr. McConnell, isn't it? The Senate leader. If he's not even going to negotiate with McConnell on these 4, that's quite a bit of power for Mr. Biden. So that is my first point. The second point is Indo-centric. We are very emotional people, Professor Alvarez, and we like to be taken seriously in India. We compare ourselves with China, etc., etc. So we are absolutely delighted that the much awaited phone call has come from Mr. Joe Biden today. Our Prime Minister has spoken to Mr. Joe Biden in a telephonic conversation. I just looked at the readout, the External Affairs Ministry, and as you rightly said, it seems to concentrate on COVID, on climate change, and on cooperation in other areas of multilateralism. This is what the two leaders have talked about. There is no mention of trade, which is a big irritant in the relationship between United States and India. The biggest irritant is trade. There is no mention of it. Moreover, China poses a very difficult problem for India, if what you say is true, and what you say is absolutely true, I think also. That is, depending on the circumstances, you put it very beautifully, that United States is consider China either as an adversary or as a strategic competitor, or even as a as a person with whom they can do business, which is climate change, for example. If this is the case, I venture to suggest the strategic space for maneuver for India's foreign policy will reduce dramatically. With Trump going at China with a wrecking ball, it suited us. This is going to be a problematic situation for us because it will reduce the strategic space for maneuver. So this will pose a very difficult challenge. I now come to WTO. I think I have no reason to disagree with anything that you said. That is why I find it remarkable that having spent 10 years, I could not have foreseen some of the things that you said. So it is remarkable what you say, which is that he will try to engage with WTO, but he has himself said in this famous article in Foreign Affairs, which he wrote, he has said he's not going to rush into trade agreements in a hurry. The problem for India is twofold. Can we try to delink from China by making United States accept that India is a developing country? This is the biggest challenge we had with Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump always put us in the same basket, India and China. If we can convince Biden, and I hope he's more reasonable, my way of appealing to Biden will be, please make a visit to India. That is enough to convince you we are a developing country. I think all you need to do is come to India, go to China, you will know for yourself. I think Mr. Trump was taken from the airport to Ahmedabad. He did some Namaste Trump and then went back. And he saw the Rashtrapati Bhavan and said, we are a developed country. But I think he should see the villages. Then he will know that India is not a developed country. So that is the first problem. The second problem we have in the WTO, in the context of WTO, Trump removed the GSP privileges for India, which are worth 6 billion. 6 billion is not much in the context of bilateral trade between India and the US, but it is very symbolic because GSP is given to developing countries and close allies. So can we reinstate GSP with Biden? So these two issues will be absolutely critical for India. Now, on the other issues, if I may, I don't have anything else to disagree with you because you're absolutely brilliant. But if I can add, one is Mr. Biden's obsession, or not obsession, but I think correct, legitimate obsession with a global summit for democracy. He has promised that in the first year, Biden will have a global summit for democracy. If I were to advise the Ministry of External Affairs, which I don't these days, I'm quite happy I don't. I think we should have this global summit in India. If I were Indian government, I would do that. But maybe he's thinking of doing it in the United States. I don't know. But I think India should take an active part because we call ourselves the world's largest democracy and so on. But it is particularly in the area of human rights that a lot of Indians are concerned about what kind of a dialogue can happen between United States and India. There is a bit of baggage with regard to statements by the Vice President-elect, statements by members of the Samosa caucus, people like Pramila Jayapal and others who have made comments about India's actions in Kashmir. So this will be a matter of some concern for India. Ideally, India would like to be talked to privately. We don't like public reprimands, as some other countries may not bother about it, but we are a very prickly, sensitive country. If you privately tell us, it's fine. But if publicly you're going to slam India, then Indian leaders will be forced to give it back, tit for tat. That is just the politics of it in India. So that is a bit of an issue, I think. But moving on from human rights, I also think the larger issue of Indo-Pacific should give us some satisfaction, because in today's conversation between the Indian Prime Minister and the President-elect, they seem to have talked about Indo-Pacific. The problem we have with Indo-Pacific is that the commitment of United States and Japan, Australia is somewhat different, but the commitment of United States and Japan is critically important for India. India can't do it by itself. To keep the region Indo-Pacific, for freedom of navigation, for overflight, for maritime security, we cannot do it on our own, India. So we need the support and unconditional commitment of United States and Japan. And Australia, of course. So that is a critical area. I'm glad they talked about it in today's conversation, the two leaders. But I wanted to raise this issue because if United States starts engaging with China selectively, will that make a difference to Indo-Pacific? That is a big question mark I put. I don't know the answer to that question, because it's one thing to have a completely antagonistic relationship with China, as Mr. Trump has now. But if you're going to have part competition, part cooperation, which is the kind of relationship you are describing between US and China, which is correct, because Mr. Biden himself has said that on nuclear proliferation, on climate change, on COVID, he wants to cooperate with China. He's not going to, take on China. So if that is the case, how will this impact on issues like Indo-Pacific? And that is something that we need to look at carefully. I was very struck by your comments on ICC and ICJ. I would have thought that the John Bolton kind of exercise with regard to International Criminal Court should be withdrawn immediately by Biden. It was very unfair, the kind of comments that were made about officials of the ICC, the assets were blocked, visas were denied. That is not the America we know. So I hope, and you are right, you said that Biden will remove those instructions at once. My more interesting point is about ICJ, because Iran has made this point, and ICJ has accepted jurisdiction of Iran when it comes to lifting of sanctions. And if ICJ issues a verdict against United States and in favor of Iran, how will a Biden administration react to it? That will be interesting to see. The Palestine case in front of the ICJ is also interesting, because Palestine has argued that Jerusalem doesn't belong to Israel. So how can you have an embassy in Jerusalem? Their argument is very interesting, by the way. When I read the submission of Palestine, they said, you have moved the capital from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, but Jerusalem doesn't belong to Israel. And according to the Vienna Diplomatic Convention, you are supposed to have an embassy in a place that belongs to the territory of the country. You can't have it in a disputed territory. So that's a good point. And again, how do you see ICJ, judgment? Will Biden be forced? But at the end of the day, I will finish here. I think what we realize in India is that it is back to predictability. There will be some predictability with the Biden administration. We are, of course, super excited about our Chitti Kamala or Auntie Kamala. How she will react, I don't know. But, we are excited given the fact that she's got Indian roots and so on. I think the State Department, there was a wonderful article by William Burns. He's an amazing diplomat, and it has been completely hollowed out by Trump. And that you are absolutely right. I think Biden needs to take the State Department, fill it with people. But there was such a massive exodus of good people. I had friends in the State Department who left, who couldn't work in the Trump administration. I think America will need those people back. But that should not be a problem in the United States, because unlike India, you have a revolving door policy. People move from the government to the private sector and then come conveniently back to the government. We don't allow that in India, but you do that in the United States. So on the whole, what you have painted, Professor Alvarez, is an amazing picture, actually, because you've not left any single organization or subject. You've actually covered the whole gamut of international law. For that alone, I must take a bow, frankly. And I really want to thank you for this amazing, amazing lecture. And thank you, Ankit, for the opportunity as well. I hand it back to you, Ankit. Thank you.
Professor Alvarez, comments, response?
Well, I don't want I don't want to belabor this. I just want to say that the one thing I would highlight is that one of the things I did not say is that you can expect, as with happened after Watergate, that there will be efforts to restrain executive authority. That is, there were lots of understandings of things that were never formally put in law that Trump just ignored. And so my colleague here at NYU, Bob Bauer, together with Jack Goldsmith of Harvard, has put out a number of proposals that would be legislative, that I suspect will have bipartisan support, that will put some of the guardrails back on the executive. So there will be some attempts. And I wouldn't, for example, it's quite possible that they will deal with the pardon power and this issue of whether Trump could ever pardon himself or a future president could ever pardon himself, and the scope of the pardon power. But that's just one. So I would say that executive authority in the US will come under scrutiny. Many people agree with you that executive unilateral authority has gone very far, and we like it when it's Obama. We don't like it when it's Trump. And so we have to restore some sense of checks and balances there. With respect to the power of the president that you talked about on international agreements, that is a quite contentious issue. That is the subject of a large number of US Supreme Court opinions instead of say, statutes. If any of the folks listening in are curious about that, a particularly good article on this is Harold Coe, Tripart's End, at 126 Yale Law Journal Forum, 338, 2016 from 2017. Harold Coe's argument is that the old delineation between sole executive agreements, congressional executive agreements, and Senate consent to ratified treaties has been breaking down. Trump and Obama pushed the outer limits. The one downside that you can see when you go down the path of informal agreements just by the executive, the Iran deal and Paris Agreement, is that their legal status as a matter of law inside the United States is left to only what's there in existing law, even though I agree with you that under international law and the Security Council, they would be very different agreements. So that's one downside, the sheer ambiguity of their legally binding authority. The other downside is if the president goes in, it is politically easy for the next president to go out of the same agreement. Whereas at least when it's a congressional executive agreement or a Senate, there is political pressure, not necessarily established case law, that says the Congress should also be involved in getting out of a treaty. So keep in mind, there's a price to be paid for the types of agreements that Harold Coe encourages in that article, which is ignore Congress, just do it these other ways. I hope that answers some of your questions.
It does. Thank you.
I'd like to end the discussion. Well, thank you very much indeed, professors, for agreeing not only to participate, but also to share your thoughts on the Biden administration, which is going to reimagine the fate of international law. I shall not take much time, especially after this erudite and powerful tour de force of the topic and theme. But before I close, I'd like to make three very small points. I am primarily a student of international relations. I have had the good fortune of studying under the expert tutelage of both Professor Kumar and Professor Erickson. In their teachings, there has been a recurring theme which resonated with the writings of one Louis Henkin. Louis Henkin is considered one of the most influential contemporary scholars of international law and the foreign policy of the United States. He, in fact, like our chief guest today, was the former president of the American Society of International Law and also of the American Society for Political and Legal Philosophy. Louis Henkin, in his book How Nations Behave, said very famously, and I quote, "Almost all nations observe almost all principles of international law and almost all of their obligations almost all of the time." As such, the trend in contemporary international relations is that war remains a possibility, but it is much less acceptable now than it was a century or even a half a century ago. The benefit of the trend is almost full compliance leads to states adopting a pattern of obedience and predictable behavior. Therefore, conflict only arises when countries fail to comply. Failure of compliance towards the norms of international law naturally have resulted in catastrophic consequences. In this faint-hearted attempt of mine to exasperate the ill will and uncertainty around the reverence for international law that we as a human race find ourselves in, I am reminded of a stirring passage from Ulysses by Alfred Lord Tennyson, who said that though much is taken, much abides, and though we are now that strength which in old days moved heaven and earth, that which we are, one equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. Over the years, as a student of international relations and now of law, I have found myself making frail attempts at quenching my curiosity by reading and thereafter writing. Well, whereas my writings have been graciously applauded and appreciated by the university who awarded me with research awards, in my pursuit of learning, I have often found myself on Google Scholar staring at their motto, "Stand on the shoulders of giants." And today, at this very moment, I find myself finally standing on the shoulders of giants. And such will be the continued attempt of the Jindal Society of International Law. The raison d'etre for this society is to be a student-driven initiative towards institutional building and creating a platform for congregation, keeping in mind social distancing norms for now, and also to encourage the desire in furthering the learning in the vast expanses of international legal scholarship. In furtherance of the society's strategy, it has planned an international legal lecture series for the full duration of 2021, this being only one of the projects that the society is undertaking. Finally, as a vote of thanks, I would like to offer my gratitude to my colleagues and the core team members of the society who have very graciously accepted to become and act as the foundational pillars of this society. The Jindal faculty who have supported us, Professor Dr. Srijit and the whole team, the registrar and his office, the IT team and the events team, and most importantly, my parents and also my grandparents, without whose active and passive support, I would not be where or what I am today. With those words of gratitude and appreciation, I bow my head and bid everyone a very warm welcome, warm welcome to the opening of the society, and a very, very warm goodbye. Wish you all the best of health. Thank you. And until next time, thank you very much.
And thank you, Professor Alvarez. We'll see you in India sooner than later.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye, Mohan. Thank you. Congratulations, Ankit.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very well done. Thank you, Ankit. Excellent.
Thank you, sir.